I guess I'll start with Mr. Cole. Do you see any limitation under the Fourth Amendment or the Patriot Act on the government's power to gather information en masse on people?
Yes, sir. I see very many limitations from both the Fourth Amendment and from the Patriot Act and from the FISA Act. There are many, many limitations that are put in, and many, many checks and balances, both through the United States Congress and the court.
Let's go over a couple of those. I assume you'd have to go to the FISA court, and those are one of the checks and balances. Could you go to the FISA court and argue that you had a right to obtain, say, either an individual's or a group or every American's tax return? Could you argue that with a straight face?
Well, I think
I've got a long list of them. Yes or no?
Any individual's tax return, there are separate laws that cover the acquisition of tax returns.
All right, so you could get tax returns. Could you get it somebody's permanent record from school?
If it was relevant to the investigation, you could go to the FISA court and ask.
Could you get somebody's hotel records?
If it was relevant.
Could you get the records of everybody who stayed in a particular hotel at any time?
If you can demonstrate to the court that it is relevant to the investigation.
Okay, could you get my Visa MasterCard records?
If I can demonstrate to the court.
All right, could you argue with a straight face you could demonstrate the court to create a database of everybody's Visa MasterCard, every financial transactions that happened in the country, because Visa and MasterCard only keep those for a couple years?
Mr. Farenthold, that's all dependent on exactly what I'm investigating and what the relevance of the information would be and how it would be used and how it would be limited. All of those have to go into it. It is not a simple yes or no, black or white issue. It's a very complicated
Could you get Google searches?
I'm sorry, sir?
Could you get all those searches I made on a search engine?
Again, it would depend. I'd have to make a showing to the court that that kind of information was relevant to the investigation.
Could you get all Google searches and then come back and say we're going to search them later when we've got that information?
It would depend on the way that I would be able to search them. And again, under 215 of this statute that we're talking about, it's only if I can show that it's related to specific terrorist organizations. It's not for anything under the sun. You get the GPS data from my phones too, probably? I'm sorry? You could probably make a good argument for getting the GPS data out of my phones or the mapping software I use on my phones too. Again, there's great limitations on how I can do that, and only if it is relevant to an investigation of those specific terrorist organizations. All right, but how is having every phone call that I make to my wife, to my daughter, relevant to any terror investigation? I don't know that every call you make to your wife. But you've got them. I don't know that they would be relevant, and we would probably not seek to query them because we wouldn't have the information that we would need to make that query. But, you know, somebody like Mr. Snowden might be able to query them without your knowledge. I don't believe that's true, but Mr. Inglis could answer that. I don't think he would have access to that or be able to do it. Okay.
We don't believe that he could query those without our knowledge, and therefore those would be caught.
All right. That's slightly reassuring. The Fourth Amendment specifically was designed, as Judge Poe pointed out, to prohibit general warrants. How could collecting every piece of phone data be perceived as anything but a general warrant? Because the phone data, according to the Supreme Court, is not something within which citizens have a reasonable expectation of privacy. So do I have a reasonable expectation of privacy in any information that I share with any company, my Google searches, the email I send? Do I have a reasonable expectation of privacy in anything but maybe a letter I hand deliver to my wife in a skiff? Those are all dependent on the facts and circumstances of the documents we're talking about. In the case of metadata, the Supreme Court specifically ruled that there was not coverage by the Fourth Amendment because of no reasonable expectation of privacy. I just want to point out how concerned I am about this data being so easily available, and just with a stroke of a pen, Congress and the President could change the search criteria as to what's searched there, change the definition of a terrorist, or search the fact that this data exists in the hands of the government. We saw what the IRS has done with tax returns targeting people for political beliefs. Let me ask you one other quick question. Why do these orders not violate the First Amendment? We've talked a lot about the Fourth Amendment, but why doesn't it violate the First Amendment, my right to freedom of association and my freedom of speech, having the government know who I'm talking to and when? Again, these are issues that are looked at by the court
in determining whether any constitutional rights are involved. We don't know who it is that has a specific phone number that's being called
And you
under
can't look
this.
that up on one page on the Internet? I yield back.